And we're back with episode 14 of Dog Football Weekly. It's your host, Reed, with the co-host,
Russ.
And today, folks, we have a very special guest from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Mr. Chip Towers. Mr. Chip, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing fantastic. Honored to be on your podcast.
Yes, sir. Well, let's get right into it. Russ, we just want to ask you a couple questions. Do you know any 2023 impact players you see in that recruiting class making an immediate impact on the field?
Oh, gosh, man, you guys are like all the young. You want to know about the recruiting right away.
Yes, sir.
Everybody wants to know. It's interesting. I'll answer your question in just a second, but there are always impact players in the freshman class. But it's never as much as people, generally think. It's not always the returnees as well. We tend to look how many players they got returning. 11 starters on offense and defense, or 6 on offense, 5 on defense, or whatever it is, and you sort of decide, how good you think your team is going to be from there, and then you immediately default to the freshmen and who's going to come in right away.
Yes, sir.
Generally, what gets forgotten about is the ones in between there, right?
Yes, sir.
It's those 4 stars and 5 stars and 3 stars in some cases that have been signed in the last 2 or 3 classes that have been sweating and working in the wings, kind of in anonymity. But, that said, there's, this is a great class. Obviously, I actually don't follow recruiting. We have Jeff Sintel with Dog Nation and some other people who they're full time. So the way it works, the AJC is kind of when they become Georgia Bulldogs, then I kind of,
yes,
then they become my guys in a way. But obviously, I keep up with the recruiting, and it's been unbelievable every year under Kirby Smart. I mean, I think this is the 7th consecutive year they've had a class ranked 4th or higher in the national ratings. And so you're signing good players when you do that. And I knew you were going to ask me this question, mainly because, thank you, Reed, you gave me a heads up on some of the things you might ask.
Yes, sir.
But I'm going to throw you a little bit of a curveball here. I am going to guess, they call it a hot take maybe, that perhaps the player to have the greatest impact in Georgia's class of 2023 could be the place kicker that they just signed, Peyton Woodring. I believe his name is. Am I
yes,
saying
sir.
that right?
That's his right name.
Yeah. Number 1 kicker in the country. My understanding is Jared Zirkle, who's a returning kicker, is not necessarily a lock. So when you talk about impact, you're generally talking about scoring or impact plays. Obviously, somebody who can make plays of significance. And I think there's a chance there'll be a pretty good battle there between him and Jared Zirkle.
Yes, sir.
But the other guys are I do think Big Baby, isn't it? Jordan
Hall,
the
D lineman,
big kid from Texas.
Yes, sir.
There's gonna be some opportunities inside. I think somewhere along the lines of what you saw from Michael Williams this past year.
Yes, sir.
Defensive linemen don't generally line up and just make a huge impact right away. It takes a minute, but I think you could see something from him. And I love the linebacker, Raylan Wilson, I believe his name is.
Yes, sir.
He's 6'1", 225, but what gets me is the modern day linebacker. When you think about guys like Nakobe Dean and all the RPO that everybody's running, a guy like Raylan Wilson, who I understand is running a 10.9, 100 meters. Is really important. They're going to need some backup help in there. I think they're pretty solid, obviously, with Jamon Johnson and Smile Munden, but you got to play at least 3 to 4 there, and I think there's an opportunity for that kid. That's just a few of them, I think.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else you think, I'll be glad to. Here's probably the most impactful player though. And he's not from the class of 23 necessarily, but I would say Dominic Lovett.
Yes, sir.
The slot back coming from Missouri. That guy, I don't know what the status of Ra Thomas is right now or how that's going to shake out with a legal situation, but there's no question Dominic Lovett was recruited here, and Ra Thomas both. But he's the type of guy who I believe is going to have a major impact on the offense right away.
Yes, sir. I think Samuel Mpemba, I don't know how to say his name really. He's from the IMG Academy. I think really the edge position on this defense hadn't really been talked about a whole lot on who's going to play it because Jalen Walker saw a lot of snaps there last season, and he's kind of on the depth chart. He's an inside linebacker, but he played the majority of the snaps with Chambliss, and you lose Nolan Smith, obviously. You lose Robert Beal. So, to me, your two edge guys are going to be huge this year. I think Marvin Jones Jr., obviously, he's going to go through surgery, and so he'll miss spring practice. So that's why I think a guy like Mpemba or even Raylan Wilson could play on that edge a little bit to start the year.
I agree. Yeah, and that is a very important position. What people don't realize on that on Georgia's edge position in particular, and this is where they really miss Nolan Smith. There's a lot of idiosyncrasies to it. It's a lot. People think he's on the edge, so he's going to rush the quarterback. And Georgia's edge guys do so much more than that.
Yes, sir.
They drop into coverage. They provide the edge for the against the run game, and they get after the quarterback. I mean, they have so many responsibilities. And Georgia's defense in particular, they do a lot of zone blitz and stuff, and so you'll be looking like you're coming, but the next thing you know, you're dropping in coverage. Sometimes he'll be taking the middle third or the middle half, in coverage. That's a complicated position to play, and Georgia's going to be missing a lot of experience in Nolan Smith and Robert Beal, a 6-year guy.
Yes, sir. Well, another question we had to ask for you. Obviously, Georgia offered another 4-star quarterback this week, Jake Merklinger. What is that? My question for you is, what does that mean about the status of Dylan Raiola, the number one player, and why do you think Georgia went after another guy in this class?
Well, I think if you see, it's vintage Kirby Smart. I mean, if you look at that, he's never going to get stuck out there flapping in the wind, waiting on somebody that he wanted to get and not have him. So I think that's what it is. And, it actually turns up the heat on Dylan as well.
Yes, sir.
A little bit. You let him know that, hey, we're Georgia, man. We'd love to have you, and you're our number one guy, but, we're not going to put all our chips on the table for you necessarily nowadays with NIL and everything else. And there probably is something to that. And, I think Georgia is well set at quarterback, as it is. Again, we were talking about impact, and rarely are you going to see any impact from a true freshman quarterback. I mean, those are guys that doesn't mean that they're not great, but there's just, if you're starting a true freshman at quarterback, you've probably got some problems.
Yes, sir.
And so, I know one of your questions that Reed was talking about getting to was at the quarterback position, and I don't think there's any question at all that Carson Beck is going to be your guy in week 1 and game 1. Now, if he stays the guy, after that is going to be up to Carson Beck. And the reason I say that, Carson Beck had every opportunity in the world to transfer out. And in the age that we're in now with NIL and everything else, agreements have to be made. And I mean, this is not, Kirby hasn't told me this or anything like that, but I mean, for Carson to have hung around as long as he did, I'm sure he did so with like Stetson Bennett did last year, with the understanding you're going to be number one.
Yes, sir.
Everybody, we talk about Stetson Bennett and what he did last year. And Stetson was fantastic. One of the greatest stories in the history of college athletics and college football, for sure, in my opinion. But one of the reasons he was able to play as well as he was able to play was he had an entire year going back to last year after they won the national championship in 2021 to operate as the number one quarterback, being Todd Monken's main man, going over every single thing that you could possibly go over to be the quarterback. And leading all the sessions, taking all the snaps, that kind of thing. Carson Beck has asked for the same sort of allegiances this year, and he'll get that. And listen, but Brock, it doesn't mean Kirby would never say he's going to be our guy, right?
Yes, sir.
He's going to say it's an open competition. Any one of those three guys could win it, and they could. But for me, I'm putting my money on Carson Beck going into that first game and that first week, But then after that, it's going to be up to him, right? How well is he performing? Because Brock Vandegrift brings a lot of stuff to the table, and all of those guys do. Gunnar Stockton does as well. So there won't be any dilly dallying about it. But I expect Carson Beck to be the guy.
Well, with a quarterback change this year, what is the status for Brock Bowers, you think, on production wise?
Well, I guarantee you all the quarterbacks are excited about it. I mean, the good thing about Brock Bowers, two things. Number one, he and Stetson Bennett probably don't get enough credit for how they operated. In other words, Georgia was at a pretty high level of sophistication when it comes to the RPO. Like Brock Bowers is not lining up out there with one route. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
It's not like, you're going to run the drag on this play. Occasionally that might happen, but usually there are choices, and the quarterback and the tight end have to be on the same wavelength where that goes. And so Brock and Stetson had a great marriage, and that's what Carson Beck and Brock Bowers are working on right now, this week, probably today.
Yes, sir.
Is on being on the same page and all that stuff. But Brock Bowers being back on this team is going to help make any of those quarterbacks look really, really good. Because generally, you're not throwing a low percentage ball to a tight end, especially one like Brock Bowers. I mean, it's like get it in his general circumference, and you should be in pretty good shape. So, you're going to hear a ding dong here as I walk out of my door.
Yes, sir.
I went to my car, pick up my son, but so I apologize for the noise. But having Brock Bowers back, as well as those linemen and Oscar Delp, is going to mean a lot for Georgia's offenses next year.
What do you think? How do you think Georgia will use Oscar Delp this season? Because obviously last year we saw him use 2 tight ends a lot, and they even used some 13 personnel with 3 tight ends.
Yeah.
But what do you see kind of? Now, I don't want to call him a Darnell Washington role because Darnell did so much more for this team than just catch passes. But what do you expect to see from him, and how do you think he'll be used?
Well, he'll be used a lot. I think Georgia showed the world tight ends should be utilized in modern day, and Oscar Delp and I was going to say Darnell Washington. What's going to be interesting to me is they're so physically different, right? I mean,
yes,
nobody's
sir.
like Darnell Washington. He's like nobody else in the world. He's a big, huge guy. Really stands 6'8". I mean, he's over 6'7" and can move like he can. Absolutely devastating blocker who improved exponentially the last couple of years in his ability to be a receiver. Oscar Delp is different. Oscar Delp is much more like. It's going to be interesting to me to see how they utilize him. Now, they'll use a lot of 12 and they'll both be on the field, but the way Brock played, it's almost an insult just to call him a tight end because a lot of times he was flexed out
or like an H-back.
They have they call it his positions. I think is F, G, H back. So, and the Z. So he can be playing anywhere down, and that's what you're going to see about Brock Bowers again. So it's Oscar Delp, and forgive me, I can't even think of who any of the other tight ends are. I guess Godey and Cedar have moved on.
You have Pierce Spurlin.
There's going to be some snaps for some other guys, too.
Yes, sir. You have Pierce Spurlin coming in and Lawson Lucky. Those are your 2 guys. Plus they have Deuce Robinson, the baseball guy, who hasn't committed yet. Georgia has a good shot at landing him, too, which that'd be 3 top 100 players in the class at the tight end position.
I think if I'm a tight end, Georgia's be a place I'd want to end up right now.
Yes,
at
sir.
least as long as Todd Monken's around, right?
Yes, sir. Russ, you got any more questions?
The running backs. Who do you think takes most of? Kenny McIntosh did a lot of receiving for the Bulldogs this year. Who did you see being a receiving back?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely Dejon Edwards, and I mean, certainly Branson Robinson is going to get some stuff. And I'm like everybody else. I mean, I really have no idea what Georgia has in Andrew Paul.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
I don't think they know what they have in Andrew Paul really, because he comes in, gets his knee torn, and he's in rehab right away, and that's just a position you can't get out there and show a lot until you're 100%, and that's going to be this late this summer before he's back to that. So. But I think Dejon Edwards is a guy. Again, I think sometimes we underplay the important. If there is a position where a freshman can make an impact, it's at running back. But in particular, what you're talking about is in the passing game.
Yes, sir.
Dejon Edwards is going to be the guy who can line up and A, know what to do, all right, and then B, to catch the ball. He's been pretty good. He hasn't been great at catching the ball out of the backfield. Listen, Kenny McIntosh was,
one of a kind playmaker.
When it comes to that. So it'll be interesting to see how Dejon does. Dejon's not that big of a dude. He's a smallish guy. So can he be an every down back? I don't think he'll have to, but I think you'll see a little bit of Mr. Inside, Mr. Outside between him and Branson Robinson to start.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Chip. We really enjoyed it.
Yeah, send me a link to the podcast, and I'll send it out on Twitter, my other social media, and always glad to help out the next generation of journalists. It sounds like you guys are doing a great job, and I appreciate you having me on today.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Russ, you want to close us out?
We appreciate everybody for listening. That'll do us for this week. We'll be back around next week, and that'll be it.